Chapter 9 of Anne of the Island. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Anne of the Island by Lucy Maud Montgomery. Chapter 9. An Unwelcome Lover and a Welcome Friend. The second term at Redmond sped as quickly as had the first. Actually whizzed away, Philippa said. Anne enjoyed it thoroughly in all its phases. The stimulating class rivalry, the making and deepening of new and helpful friendships, the gay little social stunts, the doings of the various societies of which she was a member, the widening of horizons and interests. She studied hard, for she had made up her mind to win the Thorburn Scholarship in English. This being won, meant that she could come back to Redmond the next year without trenching on Marilla's small savings, something Anne was determined she would not do. Gilbert, too, was in full chase after a scholarship, but found plenty of time for frequent calls at 38 St. John's. He was Anne's escort at nearly all the college affairs, and she knew that their names were coupled in Redmond gossip. Anne raged over this, but was helpless. She could not cast an old friend like Gilbert aside, especially when he had grown suddenly wise and wary, as behooved him in the dangerous proximity of more than one Redmond youth who would gladly have taken his place by the side of the slender, red-haired co-ed, whose gray eyes were as alluring as stars of evening. Anne was never attended by the crowd of willing victims who hovered around Philippa's conquering march through her freshman year, but there was a lanky, brainy freshie, a jolly little round sophomore, and a tall, learned junior who all liked to call at 38 St. John's, and talk over ologies and isms, as well as lighter subjects, with Anne, in the becushioned parlor of that domicile. Gilbert did not love any of them, and he was exceedingly careful to give none of them the advantage over him by any untimely display of his real feelings Anneward. To her he had become again the boy comrade of Avonlea days, and as such could hold his own against any smitten swain who had so far entered the lists against him. As a companion, Anne honestly acknowledged nobody could be so satisfactory as Gilbert. She was very glad, so she told herself, that he had evidently dropped all nonsensical ideas, though she spent considerable time secretly wondering why. Only one disagreeable incident marred that winter. Charlie Sloane, sitting bolt upright on Miss Ada's most dearly beloved cushion, asked Anne one night if she would promise to become Mrs. Charlie Sloane some day. Coming after Billy Andrews' proxy effort, this was not quite the shock to Anne's romantic sensibilities that it would otherwise have been, but it was certainly another heart-rending disillusion. She was angry, too, for she felt that she had never given Charlie the slightest encouragement to suppose such a thing possible. But what could you expect of a Sloane, as Mrs. Rachel Lynde would ask scornfully? Charlie's whole attitude, tone, air, words, fairly reeked with Sloanishness. He was conferring a great honor, no doubt whatever about that. And when Anne, utterly insensible to the honor, refused him, as delicately and considerately as she could, for even a Sloane had feelings which ought not to be unduly lacerated, Sloanishness still further betrayed itself. Charlie certainly did not take his dismissal as Anne's imaginary rejected suitors did. Instead, he became angry and showed it. He said 2 or 3 quite nasty things. Anne's temper flashed up mutinously, and she retorted with a cutting little speech whose keenness pierced even Charlie's protective Sloanishness and reached the quick. He caught up his hat and flung himself out of the house with a very red face. Anne rushed upstairs, falling twice over Miss Ada's cushions on the way, and threw herself on her bed, in tears of humiliation and rage. Had she actually stooped to quarrel with a Sloane? Was it possible anything Charlie Sloane could say had power to make her angry? Oh, this was degradation indeed, worse even than being the rival of Nettie Blewett. "I wish I need never see the horrible creature again," she sobbed vindictively into her pillows. She could not avoid seeing him again, but the outraged Charlie took care that it should not be at very close quarters. Miss Ada's cushions were henceforth safe from his depredations, and when he met Anne on the street or in Redmond's halls, his bow was icy in the extreme. Relations between these 2 old schoolmates continued to be thus strained for nearly a year. Then Charlie transferred his blighted affections to a round, rosy, snub-nosed, blue-eyed little sophomore who appreciated them as they deserved, whereupon he forgave Anne and condescended to be civil to her again, in a patronizing manner intended to show her just what she had lost. One day Anne scurried excitedly into Priscilla's room. "Read that," she cried, tossing Priscilla a letter. "It's from Stella, and she's coming to Redmond next year. And what do you think of her idea? I think it's a perfectly splendid one, if we can only carry it out. Do you suppose we can, Pris?"
"I'll be better able to tell you when I find out what it is,"
said Priscilla, casting aside a Greek lexicon and taking up Stella's letter. Stella Maynard had been one of their chums at Queen's Academy and had been teaching school ever since.
"But I'm going to give it up, Anne dear," she wrote, "and go to college next year. As I took the 3rd year at Queen's, I can enter the sophomore year. I'm tired of teaching in a back country school. Some day I'm going to write a treatise on the trials of a country schoolmarm. It will be a harrowing bit of realism. It seems to be the prevailing impression that we live in clover, and have nothing to do but draw our quarter's salary. My treatise shall tell the truth about us. Why, if a week should pass without someone telling me that I am doing easy work for big pay, I would conclude that I might as well order my ascension robe immediately and to onct. Well, you get your money easy, some ratepayer will tell me condescendingly. All you have to do is sit there and hear lessons. I used to argue the matter at first, but I'm wiser now. Facts are stubborn things, but as someone has wisely said, not half so stubborn as fallacies. So I only smile loftily now in eloquent silence. Why, I have 9 grades in my school, and I have to teach a little of everything, from investigating the interiors of earthworms to the study of the solar system. My youngest pupil is 4. His mother sends him to school to get him out of the way, and my oldest is 20. It suddenly struck him that it would be easier to go to school and get an education than follow the plough any longer. In the wild effort to cram all sorts of research into 6 hours a day, I don't wonder if the children feel like the little boy who was taken to see the biograph. I have to look for what's coming next before I know what went last, he complained. I feel like that myself. And the letters I get, Anne! Tommy's mother writes me that Tommy is not coming on in arithmetic as fast as she would like. He is only in simple reduction yet, and Johnny Johnson is in fractions, and Johnny isn't half as smart as her Tommy, and she can't understand it. And Susie's father wants to know why Susie can't write a letter without misspelling half the words. And Dick's aunt wants me to change his seat, because that bad brown boy he is sitting with is teaching him to say naughty words. As to the financial part, but I'll not begin on that. Those whom the gods wish to destroy they first make country schoolmarms. There, I feel better after that growl. After all, I've enjoyed these past 2 years. But I'm coming to Redmond. And now, Anne, I've a little plan. You know how I loathe boarding. I've boarded for 4 years, and I'm so tired of it. I don't feel like enduring 3 years more of it. Now, why can't you and Priscilla and I club together, rent a little house somewhere in Kingsport, and board ourselves? It would be cheaper than any other way. Of course, we would have to have a housekeeper, and I have one ready on the spot. You've heard me speak of Aunt Jamesina? She's the sweetest aunt that ever lived, in spite of her name. She can't help that. She was called Jamesina because her father, whose name was James, was drowned at sea a month before she was born. I always call her Aunt Jimsy. Well, her only daughter is recently married and gone to the foreign mission field. Aunt Jamesina is left alone in a big house, and she is horribly lonesome. She will come to Kingsport and keep house for us if we want her. And I know you'll both love her. The more I think of the plan, the more I like it. We could have such good, independent times. Now, if you and Priscilla agree to it, wouldn't it be a good idea for you, who are on the spot, to look around and see if you can find a suitable house this spring? That would be better than leaving it till the fall. If you could get a furnished one, so much the better. But if not, we can scare up a few sticks of furniture between us, and old family friends with attics. Anyhow, decide as soon as you can and write me, so that Aunt Jamesina will know what plans to make for next year.
"I think it's a good idea,"
said Priscilla. "So do I," agreed Anne delightedly. "Of course we have a nice boarding house here, but when all's said and done, a boarding house isn't home. So let's go house hunting at once, before exams come on."
"I'm afraid it will be hard enough to get a really suitable house,"
warned Priscilla.
"Don't expect too much, Anne. Nice houses in nice localities will probably be away beyond our means. We'll likely have to content ourselves with a shabby little place on some street whereon live people whom to know is to be unknown, and make life inside compensate for the outside."
Accordingly they went house-hunting, but to find just what they wanted proved even harder than Priscilla had feared. Houses there were galore, furnished and unfurnished, but one was too big, another too small, this one too expensive, that one too far from Redmond. Exams were on and over. The last week of the term came, and still their House of Dreams, as Anne called it, remained a castle in the air.
"We shall have to give up and wait till the fall, I suppose,"
said Priscilla wearily, as they rambled through the park on one of April's darling days of breeze and blue, when the harbour was creaming and shimmering beneath the pearl-hued mists floating over it.
"We may find some shack to shelter us then, and if not, boarding-houses we shall have always with us."
"I'm not going to worry about it just now anyway, and spoil this lovely afternoon," said Anne, gazing around her with delight. The fresh, chill air was faintly charged with the aroma of pine balsam, and the sky above was crystal clear and blue, a great inverted cup of blessing. "Spring is singing in my blood today, and the lure of April is abroad on the air. I'm seeing visions and dreaming dreams, Pris. That's because the wind is from the west. I do love the west wind. It sings of hope and gladness, doesn't it? When the east wind blows, I always think of sorrowful rain on the eaves and sad waves on a grey shore. When I get old I shall have rheumatism when the wind is east."
"And isn't it jolly when you discard furs and winter garments for the first time, and sally forth like this in spring attire?"
laughed Priscilla.
"Don't you feel as if you had been made over new?"
"Everything is new in the spring," said Anne. "Springs themselves are always so new too. No spring is ever just like any other spring. It always has something of its own to be its own peculiar sweetness. See how green the grass is around that little pond, and how the willow buds are bursting."
"And exams are over and gone. The time of convocation will come soon. Next Wednesday, this day next week, we'll be home."
"I'm glad," said Anne dreamily. "There are so many things I want to do. I want to sit on the back porch steps and feel the breeze blowing down over Mr. Harrison's fields. I want to hunt ferns in the haunted wood and gather violets in Violet Vale. Do you remember the day of our golden picnic, Priscilla? I want to hear the frogs singing and the poplars whispering. But I've learned to love Kingsport too, and I'm glad I'm coming back next fall. If I hadn't won the Thorburn, I don't believe I could have. I couldn't take any of Marilla's little hoard."
"If only we could find a house,"
sighed Priscilla.
"Look over there at Kingsport, Anne. Houses, houses everywhere, and not one for us."
"Stop it, Pris. The best is yet to be. Like the old Roman, we'll find a house or build one. On a day like this there's no such word as fail in my bright lexicon." They lingered in the park until sunset, living in the amazing miracle and glory and wonder of the springtide, and they went home as usual by way of Spofford Avenue, that they might have the delight of looking at Patty's Place. "I feel as if something mysterious were going to happen right away, by the pricking of my thumbs," said Anne, as they went up the slope. "It's a nice storybookish feeling. Why, Priscilla Grant, look over there and tell me if it's true, or am I seeing things?" Priscilla looked. Anne's thumbs and eyes had not deceived her. Over the arched gateway of Patty's Place dangled a little modest sign. It said, "To let, furnished. Inquire within." "Priscilla," said Anne in a whisper, "do you suppose it's possible that we could rent Patty's Place?"
"No, I don't,"
averred Priscilla.
"It would be too good to be true. Fairy tales don't happen nowadays. I won't hope, Anne. The disappointment would be too awful to bear. They're sure to want more for it than we can afford. Remember, it's on Spofford Avenue."
"We must find out anyhow," said Anne resolutely. "It's too late to call this evening, but we'll come tomorrow. Oh, Pris, if we can get this darling spot! I've always felt that my fortunes were linked with Patty's Place, ever since I saw it first." End of Chapter 9. Anne of the Island by Lucy Maud Montgomery. Chapter 10. Patty's Place. The next evening found them treading resolutely the herringbone walk through the tiny garden. The April wind was filling the pine trees with its roundelay, and the grove was alive with robins, great, plump, saucy fellows, strutting along the paths. The girls rang rather timidly, and were admitted by a grim and ancient handmaiden. The door opened directly into a large living-room, where by a cheery little fire sat 2 other ladies, both of whom were also grim and ancient. Except that one looked to be about 70 and the other 50, there seemed little difference between them. Each had amazingly big, light blue eyes behind steel-rimmed spectacles. Each wore a cap and a grey shawl. Each was knitting without haste and without rest. Each rocked placidly and looked at the girls without speaking. And just behind each sat a large white china dog, with round green spots all over it, a green nose, and green ears. Those dogs captured Anne's fancy on the spot. They seemed like the twin guardian deities of Patty's Place. For a few minutes nobody spoke. The girls were too nervous to find words, and neither the ancient ladies nor the china dogs seemed conversationally inclined. Anne glanced about the room. What a dear place it was! Another door opened out of it directly into the pine grove, and the robins came boldly up on the very step. The floor was spotted with round, braided mats, such as Marilla made at Green Gables, but which were considered out of date everywhere else, even in Avonlea. And yet here they were on Spofford Avenue. A big, polished grandfather's clock ticked loudly and solemnly in a corner. There were delightful little cupboards over the mantelpiece, behind whose glass doors gleamed quaint bits of china. The walls were hung with old prints and silhouettes. In one corner the stairs went up, and at the first low turn was a long window with an inviting seat. It was all just as Anne had known it must be. By this time the silence had grown too dreadful, and Priscilla nudged Anne to intimate that she must speak. We saw by your sign that this house is to let," said Anne faintly, addressing the older lady, who was evidently Miss Patty Spofford.
"Oh, yes,"
said Miss Patty.
"I intended to take that sign down today."
Then we are too late," said Anne sorrowfully. "You've let it to someone else?"
"No, but we have decided not to let it at all."
"Oh, I'm so sorry," exclaimed Anne impulsively. "I love this place so. I did hope we could have got it." Then did Miss Patty lay down her knitting, take off her specs, rub them, put them on again, and for the first time look at Anne as at a human being. The other lady followed her example so perfectly that she might as well have been a reflection in a mirror.
"You love it?"
said Miss Patty with emphasis.
"Does that mean that you really love it, or that you merely like the looks of it? The girls nowadays indulge in such exaggerated statements that one never can tell what they do mean. It wasn't so in my young days. Then a girl did not say she loved turnips in just the same tone as she might have said that she loved her mother or her Saviour."
Anne's conscience bore her up. "I really do love it," she said gently. "I've loved it ever since I saw it last fall. My 2 college chums and I want to keep house next year instead of boarding, so we are looking for a little place to rent, and when I saw that this house was to let I was so happy."
"If you love it, you can have it,"
said Miss Patty.
"Maria and I decided today that we would not let it after all, because we did not like any of the people who have wanted it. We don't have to let it. We can afford to go to Europe even if we don't let it. It would help us out, but not for gold will I let my home pass into the possession of such people as have come here and looked at it. You are different. I believe you do love it, and will be good to it. You can have it."
If we can afford to pay what you ask for it," hesitated Anne. Miss Patty named the amount required. Anne and Priscilla looked at each other. Priscilla shook her head. "I'm afraid we can't afford quite so much," said Anne, choking back her disappointment. "You see, we are only college girls, and we are poor."
"What were you thinking you could afford?"
demanded Miss Patty, ceasing not to knit. Anne named her amount. Miss Patty nodded gravely.
"That will do. As I told you, it is not strictly necessary that we should let it at all. We are not rich, but we have enough to go to Europe on. I have never been in Europe in my life, and never expected or wanted to go, but my niece there, Maria Spofford, has taken a fancy to go. Now you know a young person like Maria can't go globe-trotting alone."
"No, I suppose not," murmured Anne, seeing that Miss Patty was quite solemnly in earnest.
"Of course not. So I have to go along to look after her. I expect to enjoy it, too. I'm 70 years old, but I'm not tired of living yet. I dare say I'd have gone to Europe before if the idea had occurred to me. We shall be away for 2 years, perhaps 3. We sail in June, and we shall send you the key and leave all in order for you to take possession when you choose. We shall pack away a few things we prize especially, but all the rest will be left."
"Will you leave the china dogs?" asked Anne timidly.
"Would you like me to?"
"Oh, indeed, yes, they are delightful." A pleased expression came into Miss Patty's face.
"I think a great deal of those dogs,"
she said proudly.
"They are over 100 years old, and they have sat on either side of this fireplace ever since my brother Aaron brought them from London 50 years ago. Spofford Avenue was called after my brother Aaron."
A fine man he was,
said Miss Maria, speaking for the first time.
"He was a good uncle to you, Maria,"
said Miss Patty, with evident emotion.
"You do well to remember him."
I shall always remember him,
said Miss Maria solemnly.
I can see him this minute standing there before that fire, with his hands under his coat-tails, beaming on us.
Miss Maria took out her handkerchief and wiped her eyes, but Miss Patty came resolutely back from the regions of sentiment to those of business.
"I shall leave the dogs where they are if you will promise to be very careful of them,"
she said.
"Their names are Gog and Magog. Gog looks to the right and Magog to the left. And there's just one more thing. You don't object, I hope, to this house being called Patty's Place?"
"No, indeed. We think that is one of the nicest things about it."
"You have sense, I see,"
said Miss Patty in a tone of great satisfaction.
"Would you believe it? All the people who came here to rent the house wanted to know if they couldn't take the name off the gate during their occupation of it. I told them roundly that the name went with the house. This has been Patty's Place ever since my brother Aaron left it to me in his will, and Patty's Place it shall remain until I die and Maria dies. After that happens, the next possessor can call it any fool name he likes,"
concluded Miss Patty, much as she might have said, "After that, the deluge."
"And now, wouldn't you like to go over the house and see it all before we consider this bargain made?"
Further exploration still further delighted the girls. Besides the big living-room, there was a kitchen and a small bedroom downstairs. Upstairs were 3 rooms, 1 large and 2 small. Anne took an especial fancy to one of the small ones, looking out into the big pines, and hoped it would be hers. It was papered in pale blue, and had a little old-timey toilet table with sconces for candles. There was a diamond-paned window with a seat under the blue muslin frills that would be a satisfying spot for studying or dreaming.
"It's all so delicious that I know we are going to wake up and find it a fleeting vision of the night,"
said Priscilla as they went away. "Miss Patty and Miss Maria are hardly such stuff as dreams are made of," laughed Anne. "Can you fancy them globe-trotting, especially in those shawls and caps?"
"I suppose they'll take them off when they really begin to trot,"
said Priscilla.
"but I know they'll take their knitting with them everywhere. They simply couldn't be parted from it. They will walk about Westminster Abbey and knit, I feel sure. Meanwhile, Anne, we shall be living in Patty's Place and on Spofford Avenue. I feel like a millionairess even now."
"I feel like one of the morning stars that sang for joy," said Anne. Phil Gordon crept into 38 St. John's that night and flung herself on Anne's bed.
"Girls, dear, I'm tired to death. I feel like the man without a country. Or was it without a shadow? I forget which. Anyway, I've been packing up."
"And I suppose you are worn out because you couldn't decide which things to pack first or where to put them,"
laughed Priscilla.
"Exactly. And when I had got everything jammed in somehow, and my landlady and her maid had both sat on it while I locked it, I discovered I had packed a whole lot of things I wanted for convocation at the very bottom. I had to unlock the old thing and poke and dive into it for an hour before I fished out what I wanted. I would get hold of something that felt like what I was looking for, and I'd yank it up, and it would be something else. No, Anne, I did not swear."
"I didn't say you did."
"Well, you looked it, but I admit my thoughts verged on the profane. And I have such a cold in the head I can do nothing but sniffle, sigh, and sneeze. Isn't that alliterative agony for you? Queen Anne, do say something to cheer me up."
"Remember that next Thursday night you'll be back in the land of Alec and Alonzo," suggested Anne. Phil shook her head dolefully.
"More alliteration. No, I don't want Alec and Alonzo when I have a cold in the head. But what has happened, you two? Now that I look at you closely, you seem all lighted up with an internal iridescence. Why, You're actually shining. What's up?"
"We are going to live in Patty's Place next winter," said Anne triumphantly. "Live, mark you, not board. We've rented it, and Stella Maynard is coming, and her aunt is going to keep house for us." Phil bounced up, wiped her nose, and fell on her knees before Anne.
"Girls, girls, let me come too. Oh, I'll be so good. If there's no room for me, I'll sleep in the little doghouse in the orchard. I've seen it. Only let me come."
"Get up, you goose."
"I won't stir off my marrow bones till you tell me I can live with you next winter."
Anne and Priscilla looked at each other. Then Anne said slowly, "Phil, dear, we'd love to have you, but we may as well speak plainly. I'm poor, Pris is poor, Stella Maynard is poor. Our housekeeping will have to be very simple and our table plain. You'd have to live as we would. Now you are rich, and your boarding-house fare attests the fact."
"Oh, what do I care for that?"
demanded Phil tragically.
"Better a dinner of herbs where you chums are than a stalled ox in a lonely boarding-house. Don't think I'm all stomach, girls. I'll be willing to live on bread and water, with just a leetle jam, if you'll let me come."
"And then," continued Anne, "there will be a good deal of work to be done. Stella's aunt can't do it all. We all expect to have our chores to do. Now you—"
"Toil not, neither do I spin,"
finished Philippa.
"But I'll learn to do things. You'll only have to show me once. I can make my own bed to begin with. And remember that, though I can't cook, I can keep my temper. That's something. And I never growl about the weather. That's more. Oh, please, please, I never wanted anything so much in my life. And this floor is awfully hard."
"There's just one more thing,"
said Priscilla resolutely.
"You, Phil, as all Redmond knows, entertain callers almost every evening. Now at Patty's Place we can't do that. We have decided that we shall be at home to our friends on Friday evenings only. If you come with us, you'll have to abide by that rule."
"Well, you don't think I'll mind that, do you? Why, I'm glad of it. I knew I should have had some such rule myself, but I hadn't enough decision to make it or stick to it. When I can shuffle off the responsibility on you, it will be a real relief. If you won't let me cast in my lot with you, I'll die of the disappointment, and then I'll come back and haunt you. I'll camp on the very doorstep of Patty's Place, and you won't be able to go out or come in without falling over my spook."
Again Anne and Priscilla exchanged eloquent looks. "Well," said Anne, "of course we can't promise to take you until we've consulted with Stella, but I don't think she'll object, and as far as we are concerned, you may come and glad welcome."
"If you get tired of our simple life, you can leave us, and no questions asked,"
added Priscilla. Phil sprang up, hugged them both jubilantly, and went on her way rejoicing.
"I hope things will go right,"
said Priscilla soberly. "We must make them go right," avowed Anne. "I think Phil will fit into our 'appy little 'ome very well."
"Oh, Phil's a dear to rattle around with and be chums, and of course the more there are of us the easier it will be on our slim purses. But how will she be to live with? You have to summer and winter with anyone before you know if she's livable or not."
"Oh, well, we'll all be put to the test as far as that goes. And we must quit us like sensible folk, living and let live. Phil isn't selfish, though she's a little thoughtless, and I believe we will all get on beautifully in Patty's Place." End of Chapter 10.